Hi, Victor.
And a very warm welcome to our listeners on this episode of CA Lab, titled "Calling a Spade a Spade." Right, and today we are in this topic of straight talking. And as I was preparing for this, I could think of no better person to be doing this with other than Professor Mak Yuen Teen. And I think before I even start asking you the questions, right, I want to tell you about this anecdote that I've been wanting to tell you for a long time. It's so obviously I'm an avid follower of your LinkedIn posts, right? And over time, all of us have made this observation. A lot of people are reading it. How many people dare to click it? Click that like and the engagement. And because the funny thing is that sometimes we're all catching up on the same topics, the same developments. And in my mind, when I know this is happening, in my mind, I'm thinking, I can't wait to see what Prof. Mark has to say about this, right? And I know a lot of people are thinking the same thing, right? And I believe there could be thousands, if not tens of thousands, people who are reading and digesting the content. But yet, sometimes even that clicking of the engagement is not as high as I might have expected it to be. So there was this observation that my colleagues and I, we have all observed that. And so to me, it's something that I feel it's not easy to develop, right? Having this approach to things that people look forward to in a way. So my question for you is, what led you to have adopted this approach, both on a professional and a personal front?
First, I would say you're not the first one to tell me that. I meet a lot of people everywhere, and often they will tell me they follow my posts, right? And that includes regulators, investors, and also not only my posts, right, on my blog, right, on my website. But you're right, that often some will tell me that, I don't dare to click like. I guess sometimes because they also are a bit concerned, right, that there's this talk that sometimes employers will look at the social media kind of history of the person and who they follow and so on, right? But at the end of the day, it doesn't really bother me because, I guess I don't do things to be liked. I mean, it's very clear, So coming to your question in terms of what got me into this, right? I don't think it's kind of like you don't wake up one day and kind of say, I want to kind of be a straight talker, right? I think I've always been a bit of a straight talker. I think since young, I think upbringing and all that actually is part of that. But I guess over time, right, there is some adjustments in terms of, as your knowledge and your experience grows, right? And I think you feel more confident about your knowledge, the context, you understand more fully the context, then you kind of are more willing to, or in a better position to speak out, right? Because even when you speak out, you don't want to be talking recklessly without any basis, right? I think one of the things I always try to be clear is that when I speak out, right, I do have a basis for speaking out, and it's not because of some vested interest, right? I speak out because I think something needs to be said. Okay, so I think, I have adapted a little bit over time, but I would say that I've always had that particular trait that I would tend to speak out, right? Maybe as I've become more vocal over time, perhaps. Yeah.
So that was something that you just said about that consistency was something that occurred to me just right before we went on air here, this thing you said, you don't wake up one morning and decide that you're going to be candid, you're going to be open, you're going to be straight shooting, right? It doesn't happen one morning. But in a way, I was wondering to myself, is this something that you could develop into? Because you made this comment, you have always been somewhat of a open, straight shooting arrow. But is it possible to evolve into that?
Well, I think people shouldn't do things on the basis of, I'm doing this because it's going to help me personally, it's going to be rewarding. I think a lot of it in terms of what I am, right? I kind of always say that when I think back about my parents, like in terms of the upbringing I had, I always say I characterize my mom as being considerate, right? She was always thinking about others. And I think my father always had that compassion too. And also, I think my father also had a trait. He doesn't, if he sees something being wrong, he would want to do something about it, right? So I think that's a little bit of it. It's kind of upbringing. I don't think, I think people have to be authentic, right? At the end of the day, people shouldn't be transactional. You shouldn't do this because, I think maybe there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I'll do this. There's some payoff. I don't think people should be doing this. So I think it has to go back to the person's values. And, a lot had to do with the values and whether the person has courage and whether the person has empathy, right, and really cares about wider society. I think it has to be a lot of things. So I don't think people should kind of say, let me evolve into something like this. I think it has to be something innate, in that person, I think.
There's a reason why I asked it, but I'm going to pick up on it after I ask you another question. Sometimes when you straight talk, you might get feedback that you may not, like behind your back kind of feedback saying that, oh, but Prof. Mak comes from an academic point of view, right? It's not real life. Why don't you ask him, do this in real life, and let's see what he makes out of that.
Yeah.
And that also will occur. How do you deal with that kind of anecdotal feedback?
Okay, in the early days of my career, I guess, as I say, right, you evolve. I hear that a bit in the early days of my career, right? But I've been in this space for long enough, and a lot of my work just takes me out. I've been now on leave from the university, taken positions outside, done all sorts of things, and my work been very practice-oriented, just engage me with a lot of people outside, right? Regulators, investors, directors, executives, and so on, right? So to me, right, and it's not like I haven't served on boards. I don't accept invitations to serve on listed boards for obvious reasons, but I've served on large not-for-profit boards, I've served on other funds, and so on, international funds, and so on, right? So today I don't hear that anymore. When I started out, that I hear that once in a while. So I don't, but yes, I do get pushback, and very few people come up to my face and kind of say, I don't like what you're saying, right? But so usually you hear it through some third party who say, there's a discussion on the board and one of the subject matter was what I have said, but the funniest thing is I have quite a few occasions where I have directors who kind of told me that, your name came up in a board meeting that we're having, and they were all criticizing you. And then, on more than one occasion, the director will say, but then when I look around my board, I kind of say, actually the problem is with my fellow directors. It's not with what I was saying, right? But I do get that. And of course, at the universities, from time to time, you hear people saying that somebody has fed back to the university, not happy about what I've said and so on. But at the end, I think if you truly believe in, I think you need courage, right, to be able to do things. I always say you want to do the right thing, you must be prepared, right, to pay the price. So I'm always conscious that there's something that there's a price to pay, and doing what I'm doing may not necessarily be rewarding at all. So I wouldn't kind of say choose this as a career because it may not work out for others. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's about the feedback loop. I think we'll be talking about that. And as I'm listening to you, obviously my thoughts are also getting very swirly, right? Because there's a bit of me wanting to acknowledge that everybody has personal fears of how they are judged, how they are measured, getting feedback, right? And I think we distill it down to this single point. Should we care about what people say about us? how much weight should we give to the repercussions of what we say? And I think you brought up a very good point, right? It's about this gumption and the conviction to go about doing what you believe is right, and you will accept the outcomes in that process.
Yeah.
So I think that really kind of connects with me at a very core level, because it is something that I need to work on, admittedly. But I think this works both ways, and I think that we've talked a bit about dealing with feedback, dealing with repercussions, dealing with noise sometimes. But I'm quite sure that there have been a lot of positive outcomes from the circumstances that you have had to bring candidness, to bring honesty to the table. Okay, do you have some examples?
Well, as I say, I didn't start doing it because I thought that it would be rewarding, right? In fact, when I remember having one early conversation with my wife many years ago, and because over time as I have become more outspoken, I told my wife that, I could step on some really big toes, and there could be a price that have to be paid. And that's why I always say, whenever you do, right, you always do need the support. You may not see that, right? And I remember my wife said, well, you just do what you think is right. And if we have to move overseas, we'll do it, So you kind of need that support, right? So I always say that. So when I first started doing, actually, I thought that potentially would be a cost, but it was something I was willing to accept, right? And I didn't calculate the odds or whatever. But I think what has happened over time is because of the fact that I call a spade, right? And there are people out there, there are companies out there, there are directors out there who value that opinion, right? So I get asked to do things. I've been asked to do projects. I've been asked to do training for directors. I've been asked to do all sorts of things. And I always say, I've never gone out and chased for something to do. So as part of the university, I'm allowed to do external work, right? There's some limitations the university impose, but I do not go out and chase for work, right? So it's always people who approach me, and people who approach me, right, are a self-selected group, if you like, right? So I know certain companies will not want me anywhere near them, okay? But a good example is recently, I was doing a session for a board in Malaysia, right? Big company. And they invited me to a customized session, right? And I know, right, this board, when they invited me, they would know that I would not be there telling them how great their company is, how great their board is, right? Because when they invite me, they would know what they are getting. Okay, so I think all those who ask me know what they will get, right? So they want candid opinions. And what I did was, after a 5-10 minute introduction, I told them where their company was at. And I told them the issues that they may be facing. And it generated a very, interactive discussion, great exchange of views. And they told me they really enjoy it. But, and I enjoy doing that. But it will be because the company just want value opinions. Same thing. So I get approached to do things because then at the end of the day, right, people would know if I write a report, if I'm asked commission to do a piece of research, I've been asked a number of times, right, to do things. I think people ask me because they know that when I offer opinion or recommendation, it will not be sanitized. It will be what I think needs to be done. So there are still people who value that, and actually, in a way, so there has been some. I didn't look out for those rewards, but in a way, that has come about as a result of the way, my approach in terms of straight talking, right? Yeah.
Because of the approach that you have chosen, the approach that you have a track record of delivering, people know what you stand for. They know what they know what they will get when they approach you. And then that allows you to engage them in an authentic session.
Right.
And that then produces the authentic results. right?
Yes.
I think that's very powerful.
Yeah.
That was not an answer that I would have expected.
Every year I keep saying I've never been busier, right? And every year I keep saying, and
You
I
outdo
just get
yourself.
busier, you know, and busier with things that I love to do, you know, and you know why do, you know, I start doing stuff in Vietnam, right? And why do people in Vietnam know me when they follow me, right? And then when they ask me, they kind of know, right? I'm going to give them my unvarnished views, if you like. I think later on we'll talk about this issue of cultural kind of adaptation, right? But you know, people in various countries, you know, I often have people who come from you know, Australia, New Zealand. I don't know them, and then they come to Singapore. They say, "Could we catch up and talk?" And I'm always very open to those kind of things, right? So I always enjoy conversations, meeting people who I do not know and exchanging views, right? So I'm kind of open. So just because I'm a straight talker, right, doesn't mean I'm a cold person.
You mentioned a concept, but actually I think you used two different words at two different times. I think one time you referred to it as brave. One time you referred to it as courage. You recall, right? You brought out these two concepts. And when I heard it, to me, there is a difference between bravery and courage. And allow me to share with you what I think the difference is. If you want to be courageous, if you want to muster up courage to do something, it implies that there's some fear involved. That's why you need courage. So actually, bravery is courage without fear. Right? That's my formula.
Okay.
And so that was the thing I wanted to pick up on.
Yeah.
I believe that, and I want to tie this up to this other question I said I'll pick up later when I asked you, do people develop this whole straight talking, this whole candidness? Because you need to, perhaps that's a shift from courage to bravery. Right? I think that's what I was implying. Because I asked myself, am I capable of calling a spade a black spade a black spade? I'm not so sure, you know. I might put some flowers around the spade, right? But if I want to develop into that, there is some development, there is some evolution. It's not because we want to curate or we want to be contrived about it, but I think we want to move from courage, drop the fear, then you have bravery, right?
Well, the way, you know, interesting that you differentiate the two, right? I don't think about it in that way, but if you ask me, do I kind of weigh the odds before I summon up the courage to say something, that I say no.
Wow.
You know, then I say no. I mean, I may kind of say, how should I put it? You know, and sometimes in the context, getting it right, accurate is important to me, right? So it doesn't mean that you know, so I post a lot on LinkedIn, right? It doesn't mean I will just post, right, immediately, you know, it's kind of instantaneous, right? You reflect a little bit, right, in terms of how you post it. And sometimes after I post it, I look at it and say, did I say it in the right way? And then you kind of edit it, right? It doesn't mean that you regret what you say, right? But you just want to make sure the context is kind of right. But do I say, oh, if I say this thing, it may offend somebody, then, you know, if it's within my area of expertise or something I truly care about. And it's also, I also want to point out, right, I don't only comment about governance, right? If it's something I truly care about, right?
Taylor Swift, yeah?
Well, not just Taylor Swift, right? It's just like where I talk about a conversation I had with the taxi driver back from the airport, right? I mean, that's not governance, right? Yeah. But to me...
Is it the one he called you uncle, that one?
Yeah, the taxi driver called me uncle. So, and he was quite a bit older than me. But this is what I like to do, right? So it's not, I just want to know, you know, how is he doing, you know? And then from there, kind of try to understand his circumstances, right? So I would ask about, and then I'll post, right? So I don't post only about corporate governance, right?
Of course.
But what I'm saying is that, you know, I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't weigh kind of, oh, if I say something, am I going to offend somebody? I really don't. Frankly, I don't care that much in terms of that.
Actually, I just thought of something outside of what we prepared, but because you brought this point about the taxi driver calling you uncle, right, and evolving it, And do you think that sometimes this whole we don't weigh the odds is proportionate with the amount of white hair you have?
Oh, you mean that you have nothing to lose kind of thing?
Not
Less
so,
to
but
lose?
you have garnered more.
Yeah.
And seriously, at a certain stage,
Yeah.
do you really need to
Yeah,
put
yeah.
so much weight into
Yeah.
what people think?
I do think that, people need to, you need to listen, you speak, and you need to speak on an informed basis. I think that's quite important. I don't think people should be so I don't speak on things that I know very little about. To give you an example, right, I know some people love to be always in the media, okay? And they are called pundits, right? So every single thing they want to comment
Yeah.
on. And quite often the media will approach me and I will turn them away. I would say, well, this is not something that, it's not that I'm not comfortable about talking about it. I say somebody is probably in a better position to talk about this, or this is a layperson's matter. Maybe it's better you ask truly a layperson, right, rather than ask me, right, as an academic. Because I also need to be careful. The minute an academic, right, like myself, say something, and that's sometimes also a problem. People are too believing of what academics say. I maybe shouldn't be saying that, right? They kind of, quite often, not all, but why do the media always keep asking, a lot of articles, they will ask academic opinion, right? And many of those deal with matters that you don't really need an academic
That's
opinion.
true.
At the end of the day, what the academic is offering is a personal opinion with no real empirical basis, no real basis. So, but people seem to think, right, that academic view is more credible. I'm very careful about that. I don't want to say something and somebody interpret it like this is an academic view that is informed by, by proper evidence and so on. So I prefer generally to speak on issues I really have thought enough about, I care about, or I know enough about. Yeah.
You mentioned a bit about your more recent busy travels, right, to the region. And we earlier acknowledged that there's a cultural element to it.
Yes, you do need to understand a little bit the local culture and context and the state of maturity, right, of that market, right. For example, if I go to Vietnam, right, Vietnam really is at the beginning of its corporate governance journey. Right? I cannot go to Vietnam and say you should do A, B, C, D because this is the best practice, right? Because so you need to adjust. Because you kind of need to understand what the context is, right? But does it mean that when I go to Vietnam, I would not tell them what I really think? No. But I wouldn't necessarily say what is good for Singapore is necessarily what is right for you now. So I think that's very important. To bear in mind. I think one of the things, right, that people ask me kind of, I go to Malaysia a lot, right? I spend a lot of time in Malaysia because a lot of my work is in Malaysia with training of directors and so on. I'm very direct, right, in Malaysia. And I think some people have told me in terms of, and I'm also reflecting a little bit in terms of why I'm able to be outspoken, right? Because I think even though I'm outspoken and I straight talk, I think I'm always mindful you shouldn't be patronizing or condescending. You shouldn't go to a country and just tell them how great Singapore is and you are nothing. I think that's sometimes a failing of many Singaporeans. I think they think they come from the greatest place in the world, and they go to a neighboring country and they tell them, things are fantastic in Singapore, and you are nothing. I think people, and because overseas people follow me, right? They kind of know that I'm also critical about what's happening in Singapore. So because I'm critical about what's happening in Singapore, I can go to a country, I can be critical. They will say, well, you're not talking down to us, because you say the same thing. In Singapore, you're equally critical. I think, and of course, you do sometimes need to be just mindful in terms of not to have more realistic expectations, maybe in certain countries. But I think very importantly, right, can be straight talking, but don't be patronizing and don't be condescending. I think that's very important. I think when I come back to this issue of culture, right, that I do think sometimes people over-adapt too, in the sense of they feel that they go to country, yes, you have to be respectful, I think, of the local culture and so on. But I think, sometimes people kind of say, I go to a country, maybe I should just go with the local. I shouldn't say something that the locals may not want to hear. I think sometimes people over-adjust to this. Let me give you some examples, right? I think we always have this, maybe, I'm not sure I should be saying this, but we often think, if we think about people who are very outspoken, right? We think Americans, we think maybe Australians and so on, right? But you'd be amazed how many times I've gone into an event and the quietest, the people who have been asked the most questions are not the Americans and Australians, okay, but the locals. So it gets me thinking, right? Is it because they are now in the Asian culture, in the Singapore context, they suddenly feel that they should hold back on their views or their outspokenness?
They may have calibrated themselves.
They over-adjust, right? So I often find that an interesting observation, contrary to, whereas if you go in their context, right, if they are within a group of their own, same people and so on, you may find that they are much more outspoken, right?
That's true. Recently, after you published your most recent 3 volumes of case studies, right?
The case studies are all based on public information.
Exactly.
Right? And to me, they are to facilitate discussion, right? And when those cases are written, I always ask the students to start writing the case, and whoever is editing it, and when I finally edit it, to just use the public information and to be as balanced as possible. But sometimes, the reason why companies are chosen is because there have been events that happen.
Because there are real issues.
Yeah, there are real issues, right? Yeah.
And this is really just the process. Because in the process of calling a spade, sometimes it can be as easy as just presenting information.
Yeah.
And sometimes there could be fears and fears of repercussions.
Yeah. But generally, I have to say, right, because of the fact that you I would like to think that even though I'm a straight shooter, I'm thoughtful. I'm not reckless. Okay, so and therefore, I would have carefully thought through in terms of what I said, and therefore, because of that, often I have to say, some people may call me stubborn. It can be quite difficult to change my mind, okay, over issues. It's a bit like, if you look at my position on certain issues, right, maybe on dual class shares, for example, on specs, for example, right, my views have been very clear, and I've been very clear in terms of why I don't like dual class shares. And of course, as we were progressing towards introducing dual class shares, there were many people who have approached me to try to get me to see their point of view, right? That dual class shares are something that's good for the market. And some of them are quite influential people, right? But I say, well, that's my position. I mean, we can agree to disagree, but that is my position, right? So so in a way, right, sometimes some people may say that it means that I'm not listening to others or I've been overly stubborn. I don't think so. I think that it's because I've thought through and I have, looked at the research, I've thought through think through all the issues and so on, and form a view, right? And once I form that view, sometimes it's very difficult to change.
As we speak, I'm trying to see whether I can challenge Prof. Mak a bit.
Yeah.
And I think I may have found something. Because every time we talk, your answers come quick. I know it's very authentic, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to challenge you a bit, and I think I may have found a way. because this is quite untypical, right? Okay, don't be anxious, this is not governance. This is not governance for stakeholders. This is not LinkedIn. This is not our typical platform. In fact, this is quite rare that we have this kind of CA lab platform for us to just really not talk about the subject matter, but to talk about ourselves. Would you be able to? Is there anything that you might want to use this time to say there have been some misconceptions about you that you want to say no, that's not the case? Do you have something like that?
Misconception.
Yes.
I think the misconception may be that because I'm so straight talking, I can be very direct and blunt, right? That the misconception may be that I have no empathy. Okay? that I don't, that I do the same thing with people who report to me, who work with me. Actually, I have very good relationships with people who work with me, right? Those who have been managers, who have reported to me, I'm still in contact with them. So what I would say is that, I'm probably not very good in managing up, but I think I'm pretty good in managing downwards, in the sense that I think people need to recognize, I'm very conscious about this concept of power distance too. If you are in a position of power, so the way you deal with students, you need to be very careful with the way you deal with students, right? So I'm very careful in terms of having a divide between me and the student. People will say I'm very approachable, but I wouldn't go out to parties with them, right? I've never done. But when people make mistakes, who report to me, I mean, people who disagree can write into this guy and say, no, that's not true. But I can safely say that I do have empathy and I do have understanding. I try, I have only really fired people for ethical issues or just the way they have treated their subordinates. I've fired people or caused people to be fired because of that, right? But, and work performance and so on, I always see that I think people can always, right, be helped. So in a sense, I think because I'm a straight talker, right, and people who interact with me in social setting will say that I'm a funny guy, I'm quite a joker, and people who attend my training laugh a lot, usually, right? So I'm a straight talker, but I think some people's misconception may be that I may be a very unreasonable, high-handed person. I come back to one journalist who told me, right, the first time, and maybe I'll say my son-in-law, right, the first time, maybe I'll share with you, maybe which is that the perception, right? So that journalist who became very senior, she told me the first time she came to interview me, she said she was so scared. And she said because she thought I would be someone who will bite her head off if she doesn't understand something. And over the years, we became very good friends, right? I mean, we've been in constant contact. Even though she's no longer writing in the media, we are still in contact. So she said it was totally different from her perception of me. My son-in-law, I think, shared that the first time he came to meet me, because he had heard about, and the mother knows me, right? The mother works in a bank, so they all know me, right? So he said he felt like he was coming to meet the emperor, And then he suddenly discovered that, and I'm actually a bigger joker than him. I feel he is too serious. And now that he has married into a family, he's become a bit of a clown too. So there is that side that people do not see, I think. Yeah.
No, I think I appreciate the sharing, because that's something that I thought we all should know, right? Because sometimes that approach that we take comes at a price.
Yeah.
And then it is as though you have wrapped your identity around that. But it's not the case.
No.
Right? And then I thought that was, in fact, one of the most important questions I wanted to ask you. Right? The price that sometimes you have to pay, creating those misconceptions. But we are actually multifaceted, right? And sometimes people just look at us in one dimension. And I think what I picked up from what you have shared is that it's important for us to be seen holistically. Right? And I think I really appreciate that. So my closing question probably will be the toughest one for you, and it's actually more personal advice,
Yeah.
but also hopefully being applicable to all our listeners here on this episode of CA Lab. How would you advise people who are struggling with really having that courage, to pick up the courage to have honest, straight conversations and calling a spade, and to develop themselves to be able to bring across tough messages effectively?
That's a tough question, right? I think there are also innate characteristics, right? I don't think people can just reinvent themselves. But I would say that, I think people should just say that there are actually people out there who wants to hear the truth, and people shouldn't be saying, if you just want to be popular to everybody, then that's not the way to go, right? But I think, people should be willing to accept that I can't go through life and my goal is that for everybody to like me or like what I say. I think people have to have that mindset, right? Then maybe they'll be more willing to speak up. But as I tried to say today, right, calling a spade doesn't mean speaking without knowledge, speaking uninformed, or just being rude, right? It's different. Calling a spade is not the same as being rude. Yeah.
I think I want to thank you for your sharing today, and for me, really, the key point is, if all we wanted to do is make everybody happy, then we should just sell ice cream.
Yeah, that's true.
But otherwise, we shall speak the truth, because the truth will set you free.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Prof.
Thank
for
you.
the chat
Thank you.
today. Thank you very much.
Yeah.